The courtroom door slammed shut, and every head turned as Aisha Coleman strode in, her heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. She wasn't here to beg, she was here to fight. At 32, she'd faced worse than a prejudiced judge, but today, the weight of 1,000 eyes burned into her, daring her to falter. Aisha's skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her coiled hair pulled back tight, framing a face that held both fire and steel. She'd spent her life proving she belonged, first in the foster homes that tried to break her, then in law school where whispers followed her like shadows. Now, in this small Alabama courtroom, she stood accused of something she didn't do, her future hanging by a thread. The charge was flimsy, obstructing a police investigation, but the real crime was her existence, a black woman who refused to bow. Judge Harold Grayson sat high on his bench, his jowls quivering as he sneered down at her. "Miss Coleman," he drawled, voice dripping with condescension, "you seem to think you're above the law. Maybe where you come from, rules don't apply." The gallery snickered, a low hum of agreement from faces that mirrored his, pale, smug, certain of their place. Aisha's fists clenched, but her eyes never left his. She'd heard this tone before, in backrooms and boardrooms, from men who thought they could shrink her with a word. The trial was a farce from the start. 2 weeks earlier, Aisha had been driving home from her job at the Community Legal Aid Office when she saw flashing lights in her rearview mirror. The officer, a wiry man with a buzz cut and a grudge, claimed she'd run a red light. She hadn't. Body cam footage later showed her pulling over calmly, hands visible, voice steady as she questioned the stop. That was her mistake, questioning. The officer's ego bruised faster than a peach, and by morning, she was charged with obstruction for interfering with his duties. It was a lie, but lies stick when the system wants them to. Now, Grayson leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "I've seen your type," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Always stirring trouble, thinking you're smarter than everyone else." The words landed like a slap, and the gallery's murmurs grew louder. Aisha's lawyer, a young public defender named Mark, shifted uncomfortably beside her. He was green, overworked, and out of his depth. Aisha didn't blame him. This wasn't his fight, it was hers. She stood straighter, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Your Honor, my type is innocent. I'd like to see the evidence that says otherwise." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Grayson's face reddened, his gavel hovering like a threat. "You'll speak when spoken to," he snapped. But Aisha didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that silence was surrender, and she'd never surrender again. The trial dragged on, each day a fresh assault. Witnesses, mostly cops, spun stories that didn't match the footage. The officer who'd pulled her over, Deputy Walsh, claimed Aisha had been aggressive, uncooperative, even threatening. The body cam showed her asking for his badge number, her tone firm but calm. Grayson dismissed the footage as inconclusive, his smirk growing with every ruling in the prosecution's favor. Mark tried to object, but his voice drowned in Grayson's interruptions. The gallery ate it up, their whispers a chorus of bias. Aisha's nights were sleepless, her small apartment filled with legal books and crumpled notes. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her 8-year-old daughter, Nia, who'd started asking why mommy was so sad. Aisha would pull her close, whispering, "Because some people don't want us to win, baby. But we will." Nia's wide eyes, so much like her own, gave her the strength to keep going. She couldn't let her daughter grow up in a world where men like Grayson always won. By the third day, the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. Grayson's mockery had grown bolder, his comments laced with racial dog whistles. "You people always have an excuse," he said during a heated exchange, the words slipping out like venom. Mark shot to his feet, finally finding his nerve. "Objection. That's irrelevant and prejudicial." Grayson's gavel slammed down. "Overruled. Sit down, counsel, or I'll have you removed." The threat hung heavy, but Aisha caught Mark's eye, nodding slightly. "Keep going," she mouthed. He did. The turning point came on day 4, when Aisha took the stand. She'd insisted on testifying, against Mark's advice. "They need to hear me," she told him. "Not just my story." She wore a simple navy blazer, her hair still pulled back, her voice steady but raw with emotion. She told the jury about the stop, the officer's hostility, the way he twisted her words to paint her as a criminal. She spoke of her work, helping low-income families navigate a system stacked against them. She spoke of Nia, her reason for everything. And she spoke of the truth, that this trial wasn't about a traffic stop, it was about a black woman daring to demand respect. The jury, a mix of faces that hadn't seemed promising at first, leaned forward. A few nodded. One, an older white woman, dabbed her eyes. Grayson tried to cut Aisha off, but she kept going, her words a tide he couldn't stop. "I'm not here to make you comfortable," she said, looking straight at him. "I'm here to make you see." The room went silent, the air thick with the weight of her truth. That night, Aisha got a call from an old law school friend, Elena, who worked for a civil rights watchdog group. "Aisha, we've been digging," Elena said, her voice urgent. "Grayson's got a history, complaints, rulings overturned, allegations of bias. We found something big." Aisha's heart raced as Elena explained. A whistleblower from the courthouse had leaked documents showing Grayson had been taking bribes to sway cases, especially those involving black defendants. The evidence was damning: bank records, emails, even a recorded call where Grayson laughed about keeping them in their place. Aisha barely slept, her mind spinning. This wasn't just about her anymore. Grayson wasn't just a biased judge, he was corrupt, a predator cloaked in authority. She met Elena at dawn, poring over the documents in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee. "We can take him down," Elena said, her eyes fierce. "But it's risky. He's connected." Aisha didn't hesitate. "I'm not afraid of him. Let's do this." The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a different energy. Aisha walked in with Elena at her side, both carrying folders thick with evidence. Grayson didn't notice at first, too busy berating Mark for a minor filing error. But when Elena stepped forward, requesting to address the court, his face froze. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered. Elena didn't blink. "Your Honor, we have evidence of judicial misconduct that impacts this case. We're filing an emergency motion." The gallery erupted in whispers as Elena laid out the accusations: bribery, tampering, systemic bias. She presented the documents, each one a nail in Grayson's coffin. Aisha watched his face shift from arrogance to panic, his hands trembling as he gripped the bench. The jury's eyes widened, and even the prosecutor, a slick man named Carter, looked uneasy. Grayson tried to regain control, banging his gavel. "This is outrageous. You're out of order." But Elena was relentless, her voice rising. "No, Your Honor. You're out of time." Aisha felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not just for her case, but for every person Grayson had crushed under his gavel. She stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "Your Honor, you mocked me. You mocked my people. But today, the truth is mocking you." The room went still, every eye on her. Grayson's mouth opened, but no words came. The judge called a recess, his face ashen. In the hallway, Aisha and Elena were swarmed by reporters who'd caught wind of the scandal. By noon, the story was breaking online, X-posts lighting up with hashtags like "Justice for Aisha" and "Take Down Grayson." The evidence was undeniable, and by evening, state investigators were involved. Grayson was suspended pending a full inquiry, his career in ruins. Back in court the next day, a new judge presided over Aisha's case. The charges against her were dropped, the body cam footage finally given the weight it deserved. The jury apologized to her, some in tears. The older white woman hugged her, whispering, "You changed me." Aisha nodded, her throat tight. She wasn't here to change hearts, she was here to change systems. But the real moment came weeks later, when Aisha stood in a different courtroom. Grayson had been charged with corruption, his bribes and bias laid bare for the world to see. Aisha, now working with Elena's group, had been appointed to oversee community oversight of the case, a symbolic role, but one that carried weight. As Grayson stood before a new judge, hands cuffed, Aisha met his eyes. He looked small, broken, a man who thought himself untouchable. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood there, a black woman who turned his mockery into his downfall. For Nia, for herself, for every person who'd been silenced, Aisha had won. Not just a case, but a piece of justice, hard fought, imperfect, but real. And in that moment, she knew, this was only the beginning. Aisha Coleman walked out of the courthouse into a world that felt both foreign and fiercely alive. The Alabama sun beat down, glinting off the pavement as reporters swarmed, their microphones thrusting forward like swords. She shielded her eyes, not from the light but from the weight of their questions. "Ms. Coleman, how does it feel to take down a corrupt judge? What's next for you? Are you a hero?" She didn't answer. Heroes didn't have to bury their fear each night to keep going. Heroes didn't have to explain to an 8-year-old why people hated her before they knew her. Nia was waiting at home, her small hands clutching a drawing of Aisha in a cape, labeled, "My Superhero." Aisha had laughed when she saw it, but the ache in her chest lingered. The trial was over, Grayson was gone, but the system that propped him up still stood. She'd won a battle, not the war. Yet the victory tasted sweet, like the first bite of fruit after a long hunger. It fueled her, and she wasn't done. The weeks following Grayson's downfall were a whirlwind. Aisha's story spread like wildfire across X, news outlets, and community forums. Posts with "Justice for Aisha" racked up millions of views, some calling her a beacon, others a troublemaker. "She's tearing down our institutions," one user raged. "Good," another replied. "They're rotten." Aisha read the comments late at night, Nia asleep beside her, and felt the divide in every word. People saw what they wanted, either a black woman who dared too much or a symbol of something broken finally cracking open. Elena's civil rights group offered Aisha a full-time role, and she took it without hesitation. The work was grueling, digging through case files, interviewing victims of judicial misconduct, building cases against men like Grayson who'd skated by for years. She traveled across the state, meeting families who'd lost homes, jobs, even loved ones to a system that chewed them up and spat them out. Each story was a mirror of her own, reflecting the same anger, the same exhaustion. But they also shared her fire, and together, they began to push back. One evening, in a cramped community center in Montgomery, Aisha spoke to a room of 50 people, black, white, young, old, all drawn by her story. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady but warm. "It's about us. About what happens when we stop letting fear silence us." A man in the back, his face weathered by years of hard labor, stood up. "They'll come for you again," he warned. "They always do." Aisha nodded. "Let them. I'm ready." Her readiness was tested sooner than she expected. Grayson's allies, other judges, prosecutors, even a few local politicians didn't take kindly to his fall. They painted Aisha as a radical, a danger to law and order. Anonymous threats started arriving, first as emails, then as letters slipped under her door. "Know your place," one read. Aisha burned it in her sink, watching the paper curl into ash. She didn't tell Nia, but she started locking the windows at night. The backlash wasn't just personal. The system began to flex its muscles. Aisha's legal aid office faced sudden funding cuts, and her new role with Elena's group drew scrutiny from state regulators. "They're trying to starve us out," Elena said over coffee one morning, her eyes bloodshot from late nights. Aisha sipped her drink, her jaw tight. "They can try. We've got people behind us now." And they did. The community rallied in ways Aisha hadn't expected. Protests sprang up outside the courthouse, demanding accountability. College students organized fundraisers for her legal aid office. A local artist painted a mural of Aisha on a downtown wall, her face fierce and unyielding, with the words, "Truth Speaks," beneath it. Nia saw it on their way to school and squealed, "Mommy, that's you." Aisha smiled, but inside, she felt the weight of being a symbol. Symbols could inspire, but they could also break. The next big fight came 6 months later, when Grayson's case went to trial. Aisha wasn't just a witness, she was a key figure in the prosecution's case, her testimony tying together the evidence of his corruption. The new judge, a stern woman named Clara Holt, ran a tight courtroom, her gaze impartial but sharp. Aisha respected her, though she trusted no one fully anymore. The prosecution laid out the case meticulously, bank records showing payments from private prison companies, emails where Grayson bragged about teaching lessons to defendants, and the whistleblower's recording, his voice thick with arrogance as he laughed about rigging cases. Grayson's defense team tried to discredit Aisha, painting her as a vengeful activist with a vendetta. "Ms. Coleman has a history of challenging authority," his lawyer sneered during cross-examination. Aisha leaned forward, her voice cutting through the room. "I challenge lies. If that's a crime, lock me up." The gallery erupted in murmurs, and Judge Holt's gavel came down hard. But Aisha saw the faintest nod from Holt, a flicker of respect. The trial lasted 3 weeks, each day a battle of narratives. Grayson's team leaned hard into racial dog whistles, calling Aisha aggressive and unstable. They dug into her past foster care, a teenage arrest for shoplifting that had been expunged, even her single motherhood. Aisha sat through it all, her face a mask of calm, though her hands shook under the table. Elena coached her through the worst moments, reminding her, "They're scared of you because you're unstoppable." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Aisha spent them with Nia, playing board games and trying not to check her phone. When the call came, her heart stopped. "Guilty," Elena said, her voice breaking with relief. Grayson was convicted on multiple counts of bribery and judicial misconduct, facing up to 15 years. The courtroom, packed with reporters and activists, exploded in cheers as he was led away, his hands cuffed, his head bowed. Aisha didn't cheer. She just watched, her breath steady, her mind already on the next fight. The aftermath was bittersweet. Grayson's conviction was a victory, but it didn't erase the years he'd stolen from others. Aisha worked with Elena to file appeals for dozens of his former cases, uncovering more injustices with each file. Some defendants had died in prison, others had lost everything. Aisha met their families, listened to their stories, and carried their pain like a second skin. "You can't fix it all, Mark," her old public defender told her one day. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I can try." Her own life began to shift. The legal aid office secured new funding, thanks to a viral crowdfunding campaign. Aisha moved Nia to a better school, one where her daughter could thrive without the shadow of prejudice hanging over her. At night, Aisha started writing a memoir, raw and unfiltered, about her fight and the system she was determined to change. Publishers called, but she held off. The story wasn't finished yet. 1 year after Grayson's conviction, Aisha stood at a podium in Atlanta, accepting an award from a national civil rights organization. The room was filled with activists, lawyers, and ordinary people who'd followed her journey. Nia sat in the front row, beaming, her drawing of Aisha now framed on their living room wall. Aisha's speech was short but fierce. "Justice isn't a gift, it's a demand," she said. "We don't wait for it. We take it." The applause shook the room, but Aisha's eyes were on her daughter, her reason for every step. Back in Alabama, the mural of Aisha still stood, though vandals had tried to deface it. Each time, the community repainted it, stronger and bolder. It became a gathering place, a symbol of resistance and hope. Aisha visited it sometimes, not to admire herself but to remind herself why she fought. The wooden plaque beneath it, etched with "Truth Speaks," had been her idea nod to the handwritten note she'd imagined in that first courtroom moment. Her work grew, but so did the challenges. New judges filled Grayson's seat, some better, some not. The system didn't change overnight, and Aisha knew it might not in her lifetime. But she saw cracks forming, more people speaking out, more cases overturned, more communities refusing to stay silent. She wasn't alone anymore. Elena, Mark, and countless others stood with her, a network of fighters who'd learned from her courage. Aisha's final moment of clarity came on a quiet evening, sitting with Nia on their porch. "Mommy, are you still mad at that judge?" Nia asked, her voice small. Aisha thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not mad, baby. I'm focused. There's too much work to do." Nia nodded, her small hand slipping into Aisha's. They sat in silence, the stars bright above, and Aisha felt something settle in her soul, peace, not from victory, but from purpose. The fight for justice is never clean, never easy. What's right, what's wrong, what's fair, it's a question we all must answer, and a fire we all must carry.